Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, Grace. Hi, Lainey.
Hey.
Hey. Oh my God, we have so many books behind us. We've read them all.
I wrote them all.
We're so glad you joined us tonight on our monthly show, Writers to Watch, and we thank you for taking the time to sit down and to listen to some really, really wonderful authors tonight. I'm Virginia.
I'm Lainey.
I'm Grace.
And we're the Library Marketing Department at HarperCollins. And we are going to spend the next hour listening to four wonderful authors talk about their books. And we want you to bring your questions. So please, excuse me, write them into the chat, write them into the chat room on Facebook, wherever they. Lainey, where does everybody write their chats?
Crowdcast and or Facebook. You could write it both. I don't know why you'd want to, but you could.
All right. So please bring your comments, bring your questions. We're here. And without further ado, because it's we have authors from all over and every different time zone. So the clock is ticking. So without further ado, we are going to start with just overview. We have Dinah Jefferies, who's written The Night Train to Marrakech. We have Jean Kwok, who's written The Leftover Woman. Rachelle Unreich, who has written A Brilliant Life, and Jonathan Lethem, who has written Brooklyn Crime Novel. All these books are coming out, and you're going to hear about them right now. So first up is Dinah Jefferies, Night Train to Marrakech. Right there. Dinah, you can turn your camera on.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you and we can see you. So thank you. I think, we were talking before about where everybody is. I wasn't kidding. Everybody's someplace, the exception of Grace, Lainey, and I, who are in New York. Dinah is in Southwest England. And we are so grateful to all of you for making the time to log on and talk with us and librarians about your book. So I'm going to give a brief introduction of you, Dinah, and then I'm going to ask you to talk about your new book, Night Train to Marrakech. You began your career with the book The Separation, which was followed by the #1 Sunday Times and Richard and Judy bestseller, The Tea Planter's Wife. Born in Malaysia, you moved to England at the age of 9 and went on to study fashion design, work in Tuscany as an au pair for an Italian countess, loving that, and you live with a rock band in a commune in Suffolk. Your new book, Night Train to Marrakech, which comes out in November, so we have a bit of time. This is the third book in your Daughters of War trilogy. The Daughters of War was the first book in the series, and it's a really stunning tale of three sisters and the secrets and bravery that surround them during war-torn France. So this is the third and the last and in the trilogy, obviously. And now, Dinah, if you could tell readers what you'd like them to know about Night Train to Marrakech.
Okay, so, excuse me. It's 1966, and I wanted my readers to be able to picture Marrakech, the color, the incredible light, and to smell the air drenched in the scent of jasmine and mint, a paradise for Westerners, a place where people like Yves Saint Laurent and Jean-Paul Getty Jr. come to escape. But Night Train to Marrakech is not all sweetness and light, for the charmed lives of the foreigners are taking place in a bubble. It's the height of the Cold War, and this is a story of secrets and murder and how far we're prepared to go to hide both of those and to protect the people we love. Vicky Baudin, one of my two main characters, a young French fashion designer, arrives on the night train in Marrakech, hoping to meet Yves Saint Laurent to further her career, but also to meet Clémence, the grandmother she's never known. Vicky has always struggled with identity issues, and she's desperate to uncover the secrets of her dead father's birth, her father who was executed by the Nazis, and the secrets her grandmother is equally desperate to hide. When Vicky inadvertently witnesses the murder of a friend by someone she knows, she escapes to her grandmother's isolated Kasbah in the high Atlas Mountains. But even there, the threat isn't over, for Clemence catches sight of a man she'd hoped never to set eyes on again, and is terrified that the truth she's kept for decades will ruin her life. These two women will have to face that threat together. For Vicky at 22, it's a coming of age story, a story of self-discovery and of finding her inner strength. For Clemence at 75, it's a story of forgiveness and survival and the emotional scars she must confront to be able to live what's left of her life fully. For both of these characters, it's a story of coming to terms with loss and an adventure into resilience and courage. I'm absolutely fascinated by the ways in which the known past and the unknown past can be dangerous and disrupt the present, and that's a major theme. The bond between generations is another, the bond that grows between a granddaughter at the start of her adult life and a grandmother facing her final decades is the heart of the novel. I have a granddaughter myself, and I'm also 75. So the relationship between the two women is inspired by us. But as I said before, there's also a murder, maybe even more than one. So on the surface of Night Train to Marrakech, you have a romantic thriller with a showdown I hope to die for. But beneath the surface, it's an exploration of love lost and love found. And as we said at the beginning, it's the third book in the Daughters of War trilogy. All three can be read as standalones. So it begins with Daughters of War in France, moves to Malta for the Hidden Palace, and the third is Night Train to Marrakech. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is, there's a lot to pack in there, especially with the, we'll talk about this later, but I just love how the characters, there's bridges, there are bridges. Yes, absolutely. Each one can be read on its own. But there are also bridges to the next one, to the next book. I just want to read this quote and then we're going to go on to the next author. Hazel Gaynor, author, calls you the queen of sumptuous settings and has said that she was completely swept away to another place and time. And she said, this is a marvelous multi-layered story populated with characters to really care for. And I think that is a theme throughout the book, and also all of the interviews that I have read and listened to and watched and just reading the book, the characters are everything. And so I thought that quote was very important. Okay, Dinah, thank you very much. We are going to put you back in the virtual green room and bring out our next author. So don't go too far away. Next is Jean Kwok.
Hi, thank you, Dinah. And Jean, you can come back on camera while I do a quick intro. Hi, Jean.
Hi.
Hi. I am going to do a bio, and then I want you to tell us all about your new book. So Jean Kwok is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of Searching for Sylvie Lee, Girl in Translation, and Mambo in Chinatown. Her work has been published in 20 countries and is taught in universities, colleges, and high schools across the world. An instant New York Times bestseller, Searching for Sylvie Lee was selected for the Read with Jenna Today show book club. Jean has been chosen for numerous honors, including the American Library Association Alex Award, the Chinese American Librarians Association Best Book Award, an Orange New Writers title, and the Sunday Times Short Story Award International Shortlist. She is one of 12 authors asked by the Agatha Christie estate to write an original authorized Miss Marple story for Marple 12 New Mysteries. You're fluent in Chinese, Dutch, and English, and that is just a snippet of your larger bio, but we're so happy that you're here. And I can't wait to hear more about your new book, The Leftover Woman. So please tell us more.
Well, thank you so much for having me. As you know, I love librarians. I especially love our library team. The Leftover Woman is basically about two mothers, two worlds, and one impossible choice. When Jasmine Yang gives birth to a baby in China, she is told that her child died shortly after birth, and she grieves. But a few years later, she finds out that her daughter had not died, but had been given away by her husband to a wealthy American couple for adoption. Yet another female casualty of China's controversial one-child policy. When the novel opens, Jasmine has followed her daughter to New York City with her husband hot on her trail. Meanwhile, publishing executive Rebecca Whitney has it all. She's got a prestigious family name, she's got wealth, she has a high-powered career, a beautiful home, a handsome husband, and an adopted Chinese daughter that she adores. But this perfect world of Rebecca's begins to crumble, and her role in her own family is called into question. In The Leftover Woman, Jasmine and Rebecca are on a shocking collision course. And it's a story of two women in a divided city. They are so different, like they couldn't be more different. They're separated by incredible economic and cultural differences, but they're bound together by their absolute unconditional love for a child. And The Leftover Woman came from my own struggle as a woman in a traditional Chinese family. It's the most deeply personal novel that I've written since my debut, Girl in Translation. I was the youngest of 7 children, and also a girl. So in terms of, the Chinese hierarchy, I was at rock bottom. I moved from Hong Kong to Brooklyn when I was 5 years old. We lived in a rat-infested apartment that didn't have a working central heating system in bitterly cold New York City for most of my childhood. We worked in a factory in Chinatown, and I started working there when I was in kindergarten, and I spent many years of my childhood working in that factory. As a kid, I understood that I would basically work at that clothing factory my entire life, from child to old woman, cutting off thread on buttonholes. And the only alternative route was to try to find some man to marry me who I could cook for and clean for and bear sons, not daughters. And my family despaired that they would ever find some man willing to do this because I'm a terrible housewife in every way and dreamy to boot. So I decided, I looked at my choices. It was, it was not considered necessary in my family for a girl to get an education or to go to school. And so I knew my choices were working in that clothing factory for my entire life, or finding a man to take care of. And I was very young. I was 7 years old. And I remember sitting there and thinking to myself, you know what? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Harvard. And years later, I did. So I was lucky that I had this academic escape path, but so many people I know didn't. And I know about the ways the one-child policy was devastating families in China. I knew people who'd given up their daughters. I knew friends who were the daughters who'd been given up. And I knew that someday I'd write this novel. It's an emotional topic for me, and yet it's one that's rarely depicted in fiction or film. It's about so many issues that are relevant today: interracial adoption, the role of ambition in a woman's life, working moms, sacrifices, what it's like to be a woman in a male-dominated society, the power of appearances, how we evaluate another person, especially if that person is foreign or a woman, and, the issues of adoption and the American dream. Does the American dream exist? If it does, what is the price and who pays that price. And I was particularly interested in interrogating the fetishization of Asian women. In fact, I do something I haven't seen done before, which is I use a genre plot twist to replicate the white gaze. So you have to read the novel and see if you know what I mean. But basically, it's a family drama that's also a novel of suspense. There are twists and turns. There's a murder. There's a young woman trying to recover her lost daughter. And there's love that blossoms in the most unexpected of places. It's a love letter to motherhood and belonging. And it's a celebration of our ability to learn and change. And it's really about the qualities we have in common instead of the issues that drive us apart. So I really hope that you all will enjoy The Leftover Woman.
Wow, Jean. Well, I think I speak for everybody, all your readers, when I say we're so glad you kept dreaming and have given us so many great books. And so glad you listed off all the themes in this book. There's so much packed in it. And it was so page turning. Thank you. And I'm going to hand it off to my colleague for the next author.
Thank you, Lainey. Okay, so I am so honored to welcome Rachelle Unreich. Give me one moment, I'm about to pull up your jacket. Okay, so Rachelle is the author of A Brilliant Life. Rachelle, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Very exciting from Melbourne, Australia.
Yes, hello. And this story is best told by Rachelle. But before I virtually hand off the mic, here's a bit about her. When she was still a university student in Australia, she began her career in journalism. Although she graduated with 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Arts and a law degree, she has been a journalist for 37 years. She spent 7 years in Los Angeles and New York writing about the entertainment industry, and her work has appeared in Harper's Bazaar, Elle, Rolling Stone, the Sydney Morning Herald, among other publications. And she currently lives in Melbourne, Australia. So thank you for joining us this morning for you, but tonight for us. Tell everybody a bit more about A Brilliant Life.
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank librarians, because growing up in Australia in the 1970s, I felt really isolated. And so libraries really bridged that gap and helped me feel more connected and introduced me to so many voices that I think helped shape my own voice. My book, A Brilliant Life, has as its subtitle, my mother's inspiring story of surviving the Holocaust. But I didn't set out to write a Holocaust book. I really wanted to write about the great love I felt with my mother and that powerful bond between mother and child, as well as the grief I felt over losing her. When I began interviewing her, my mother, Mira, it wasn't that I wanted to find out exactly about the Holocaust, because I felt like I knew a lot of that stuff. The war had broken out when she was 12 years old, and by 17, she was deported and imprisoned in the first of 4 concentration camps, which would include Auschwitz, and be on a death march. But what I really wanted to find was, how had she survived and been this incredibly buoyant, joyful person? That was, really, that was the thing I wanted to understand. And here you see a photo. She's in the center as a child, just beaming, and later on with me. And, a story that really summed this up for me was when she did a testimony with the Shoah Foundation, which collects Holocaust testimonies. She spoke for several hours and she was detailing these awful things that had happened, just devastating cruelties, horrors after horror. And the interviewer said to her at the end, "Did you learn anything from your experiences?" And she barely thought before she said, "In the Holocaust, I learned about the goodness of people." And that was just extraordinary to me. How had she gone through this terrible thing, and instead of focusing on the people who tried to destroy her, was really thinking about those who wanted to help her and to save her? The other thing I think I wanted to come to terms with and understand was sort of what I call the mysteries around her. There were all my life, there were these inexplicable, sort of mysterious, strange things happening, and the most powerful of which was something she told me that happened in camp. She'd been in 4 camps and it was 9 months in, and at this point she was she deteriorated so much. She was incredibly emaciated. she said that every tooth was wobbling in her mouth and she could no longer get up to roll call. She was just lying in her barracks. The only thing that was keeping her going was her will to live, but even that was fading fast. And so she went to bed one night and she prayed to God, and she prayed to be reunited with her mother, who she knew had been killed. But instead, she had this dream, and in her dream, her mother came to her and fed her soup spoonful by spoonful and said to her, Mirror, I want you to hold on until your birthday. And on your birthday, I will come and save you. And when my mother woke up, she really felt like her mother had been with her, had sort of crossed some kind of realm. She felt sustained, as if her mother really had fed her soup. And she said, okay, it's my birthday in 4 days' time. I'm going to hold on until then. And then I know that if nothing happens on that day, I'll be able to die. But on her birthday, she was liberated. And, you know, that story really always stuck with me, and I think was really, you know, the genesis of this book. Writing about this was really a story of discovery, not just of my mother, but of how the pieces of her life fit into my own, and learning about family members that I had never met in life. So I think you've got a photo of Olga, which was her sister. You know, I didn't know much about Olga, just about her by name, but in researching this book, I got to know her as a person. I saw her smiling with her dimples. I learned about the romance she had that didn't work out and her marriage. She was 26 when she was deported and ultimately killed. And when I came to writing about her, I just sat at my keyboard and tears were pouring down my face. There was this element of incredible discovery with this, which included finding archival material in the National Archives that our family hadn't seen, didn't know existed, and had been there for 80 years. Even though my mother had been through the Holocaust, it didn't define her. And so what I was trying to do is also just capture who she was and who she was outside of that time. So I write about her before the war in Czechoslovakia, afterwards when she was in Paris for 10 years raising a family, and beyond that too in Australia. And I think you've got a photo of her there. And then there's one more that you've got of our house. She passed away 6 years ago, but we've kept her house intact. So walking into it, you can see it's kind of like this wild time capsule into the 1970s. And to me, that really exemplifies what she was like as a person. She didn't live quietly, and she made herself known, and she was buoyant and vivacious. And I really want to capture that in my book. I'm hoping that people get a sense of her, and also they learn from her lessons. She wasn't traumatized by her experiences. She went on to go to live a life where she flourished and thrived. One of the things I write about is, after her death, I found a letter she wrote me where she said, "The happiness is near," in all caps. I had no idea what that meant. The happiness is near. But what I realized was it wasn't a prophecy. It was a way to live. The happiness is near because it is always near. It is there for the taking. It is there to be grabbed, but you have to make it happen. And so I hope people do read about her and get to know her and love her as we did.
Rachelle, thank you for sharing Mira's story with us and for being here today to tell librarians about her. It was so moving to read about her, and I think you just captured who she was so beautifully. So thank you for that. And yeah, I will pass it to Virginia.
Oh, okay. These are all such really such powerful stories, and thank you for that. That was amazing. Okay, now Jonathan Lethem, are you there? Jonathan Lethem, author of Brooklyn crime novel, which is coming out in October from Echo. A little bit about Jonathan. Jonathan Lethem is the best-selling author of 12 novels, including The Arrest, The Feral Detective, The Fortress of Solitude, and Motherless Brooklyn, which was the winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award. He's currently teaching creative writing at Pomona College in California. So now I think we've gotten all the time zones tonight. So Jonathan, your next book, Brooklyn crime novel, is this sweeping story of community, crime, gentrification, tracing over 50 years of life in one Brooklyn neighborhood. So there's lots to talk about here. I can't wait to hear what you've got to say about the book. So please tell us more about Brooklyn crime novel.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for gathering. It's so moving to be speaking with librarians who, you know, I think so many of us authors grew up as the kind of kid who feel that librarians sort of saved their lives at some point, offered a haven and a portal into worlds that we needed to discover. And oh, what a pleasure to follow Dinah and Jean and Rachelle. You're also great at talking about your books. I'm so excited, and they sound so fabulous. I am very proud of Brooklyn crime novel. It's a book that, in some sense, it took me 20 years to be ready to write. The last time I wrote about Brooklyn was in a novel that some may remember called The Fortress of Solitude. And that was a book that I started in the previous century and finished in the current one. But it represented a time when I, at that moment, felt I could suddenly tell my story of growing up in this very wonderfully complex, difficult but splendid, extremely multicultural, gentrifying neighborhood in Brooklyn. And I wrote that book, which was published 20 years ago, as a kind of coming of age story. I put a little boy like myself at the center of that story. And I tried to tell every truth I knew about that time and place in that book. And I felt I'd been exhaustive and I'd done my best. And for a long time, that seemed to be an appropriate final word. But the world changed in 20 years. Brooklyn changed, and I changed. And in many ways, when I wrote about Brooklyn 20 some odd years ago, the life I'd known growing up was still tangible. It was still within reach. But I also think that the world had not come to understand the implications of gentrification, or, well, in the most particular way, our conversation about race in the United States was in a terribly frozen state. It was really immobilized. And my own ability to talk about it, my own capacity, was only equal to the language that was available to me and the kinds of conversations that I was surrounded by. I did my best, but as we all know, these conversations and these understandings have broken open in subsequent years, especially in very recent years. And it began to seem to be the case that I'd only just recently learned and understood the things I really needed to know and be able to talk about growing up in the racially mixed, gentrifying Brooklyn of the 1970s and 80s. And suddenly the work I'd done seemed not insufficient or wrong, but like a beginning of a conversation, and an urgent conversation that I wanted to resume. And of course, this also meant for me that this was a very multivocal book. It's my writing, but it's the voices of people I knew and recontacted and just discussed the past with. And so Brooklyn crime novel isn't easy to summarize as a story because it's many stories. Yeah, I really have joked with people that it ought to be called Brooklyn Crimes Novel. I ought to have made the title plural because there are so many different crimes that go on in this space. And in many ways, the mystery in the book that the reader and that I had to solve was which crimes matter. Which of the many crimes that we live with every day as victims and as perpetrators are the ones that are going to define us, and that when we look back 30 or 40 or 50 years later, we will need to understand in order to become complete and to heal ourselves. So this is really a book about reckonings with a world that I've never stopped thinking about, a world of childhood, a world of crime, a world of people trying to live in a neighborhood together, idealistically, passionately, occupying the same space, the same block, the same street, and misunderstanding one another, and trying to reach across boundaries, and succeeding and failing in different ways. And the conundrum and the fascination of this place that I come from, it preoccupied me for my whole life. And so Brooklyn Crime Novel really represents another deeper attempt to convey and ask myself, first of all, to abide with and think about all of these perplexities that, define all of our lives. What it is to go to a neighborhood and live side by side with your neighbors, what it is to raise children in a place where you yourself didn't grow up, and what it is to be a child whose life inside their house and the life of the street are incommensurable, two different worlds. And yet one has to find a language to bridge those two different worlds. I really wanted to write about this book, not from the point of view of one poor little boy like me, but instead to find a collective consciousness where I could say, this is what it was to be in this place from so many different points of view, especially from the points of view of all the different children living there, who I came to see as a kind of group mind. It's as though growing up in Brooklyn was a problem we were all trying to solve on a daily basis on the street. Was that easy? Not at all. Was it exciting? Often it was exciting. Was it terrifying? Often it was terrifying. But in some strange way, we were all in it together. And this was the puzzle that I was trying to solve. What we'd known, but been unable to express at that time. I wanted to try to give it a voice. And that voice is this book, Brooklyn Crime Novel. I'm so pleased to be able to share it with you. It's the most personal and also the most intellectually daunting book I've ever written, just trying to figure it out. It just took so much thinking. And I'm so excited for the conversations that will begin for me when it's published. I don't see this book as me coming down from the mountaintop with the gospel. I see it as a participatory book where I'm going to become a listener as much as a teller of these truths. Thank you very much for taking the time to hear me talk about it today. And again, it's just such a pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you, Virginia, and everyone.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's it is, well, because it is such a personal book. And it's funny because my question was, what has changed? And basically everything has changed, down to the language, as you say. 20 years between these books on this same subject, but through different eyes, and now with more language available to you. I just want to read this one quote from Colin McCann, author of Let the Great World Spin, says of Brooklyn Crime Novel. He calls it a blistering book, a love story, social commentary, history, protest novel, and mystery joins the whole together. Is the crime time or the almighty dollar? I got a great laugh from it too. Every city deserves a book like this. Cool quote.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you. And I think now we should just bring everybody back on. Dinah, Jean, Rachelle. Hi. Can you all hear us?
Yeah.
This was wonderful. Thank you all so much for not easy, I would imagine, to sort of describe your book in 5 minutes or so, but you've all managed to do it in a way that people are just saying, can't wait to read it. So thank you. Now we'll get to a few comments and questions, and So we'll just take it from there. So let's see. What do we have here? Okay. I'll start on a Facebook one, and then we have a couple of platforms going on, Facebook and Crowdcast and God knows what else. But where everybody's in a different time zone here, and it's super fun, especially for the ones that's not midnight. Let's see. Barbara Earhart says, love Jean's books, met her at the Morristown Book Festival, and she's a lovely person. Lots of comments and love for all of the authors here. Let's see. Oh, how can we buy the books that are being discussed today? So the books aren't coming out. We've told you all they're, coming out in various months coming forward. And so I believe everything is now available on NetGalley. Is that right, Lainey and Grace?
Nope,
I
not
think only 2, but the other 2 should be up soon, and I'll look into it. I'll look into when.
Okay. Barbara Ringel has a question for Jonathan. Does Jonathan still live in Brooklyn, or is he still connected to valued friends or families there?
Yes. Thank you. Well, these days I live in California. I'm teaching at Pomona College. And so where you find me today is a town called Claremont. It's a little suburb of Los Angeles. But I am so connected to Brooklyn that I feel in some ways that I live there in my head, helplessly all the time. And as I began to say, but you may not even have, I may not have made it clear how literally this is the case. This book depended entirely on my ability to retrace my steps through old friends and family, many of whom still live on the block. I mean, not just in Brooklyn, but they're still right there in the houses where I last visited with them. And there were people I reconnected with in order to write this book who I hadn't seen since we were both in 7th grade. I was just obsessed with reconnecting. And in some strange way, I was very lucky to be writing it during the pandemic. Here we are on a Zoom, which is this weird mixed blessing, right? It's like so personal and so alienated at the same time. But people were stuck in their houses. And when I would reach out to them, when I'd find them on Facebook or by asking another old friend to find someone for me, they were in this state, I think we all were there for a while, of deep reflection and inwardness. And so we would have these passionate conversations on Zooms. I thought I would be researching this book in person on the streets of Brooklyn. Instead, I did a lot of it this way, but people were so opened up and reflective. And I was on this platform crying with school kids from, 50-year-old school kids, but people I still think of as, school kids on a daily basis in order to reconstruct that sense of that world. I needed perspectives other than my own. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think that actually leads really well into our next question to everyone. What was the most surprising thing that you came across or encountered while writing your books? I think that can be asked in a lot of ways, whether it's research or something you discovered about yourself or others. So, Rachelle, if you want to start.
One of the kind of holes I had in my book in terms of research was my mother's first husband had escaped from Treblinka. And so few people had done so, and certainly hardly anyone had recorded their testimonies. And I had a few notes that my sister had taken, but they were piecemeal. And so I was trying to put together this story. But through historians and academics, I ended up uncovering a mislabeled document, first in Yad Vashem in another language, in Hebrew, and then later on in the National Archives, where he had actually given this 14-page testimony during the war. And that was so extraordinary. Like, as a family, we could piece together these things that happened. And I think then his descendants could also understand how he had acted the way he had during his life, to understand really the trauma he went through. So that felt unbelievable. And I think it will really add in some tiny way to Holocaust history as well, because, like I said, not many accounts of Treblinka have been documented. That was there, but not out in the public domain.
That's interesting. Dinah, do you have an answer for that? as well? We can
Well,
ask-
yeah, in a funny sort of way, I don't write thrillers, and halfway through this book, I realized I was, and it kind of left me really a little bit like frozen, because I don't write thrillers. I don't even like thrillers, and there I was with a thriller. It's not really a thriller. It's kind of got thriller elements, and gradually I settled into it. But it was the start of a kind of new kind of book for me. They're normally historical dramas, really, from 1925 to 1966. But the books I'm now writing, a trilogy I've just started, is kind of completely different again. And this is what I wanted. I was kind of searching around for where could I go that was different? What could I do that was challenging? What, each story is different, each character is different, so on. But suddenly stumbling across this thriller element in my book was quite exciting, and at the same time sort of terrifying, because I don't read them, I don't know about them, I don't know anything about them, and I don't enjoy them, and the few that I have read, because I don't like being on the edge of my seat. But I didn't mind being on the edge of my seat when I was writing it, because I was in control. So that's what I discovered.
Love that. That's great. Jean?
Well, the thing that about The Leftover Women is that it's an impossible dilemma, right? You have two mothers who passionately love this one child, and it has to be solved in some way. And obviously, as a reader, you go in saying, how in the world is she going to manage this? As a writer, I can tell you the same thing happened as well. Where I was like, how am I going to fix this? Like, how in the world am I going to come out with something that is right, that feels right in some way? And I have had, people who, let's say, have adopted a Chinese child or a Chinese daughter say to me, I'm so intrigued by your book. I want to read it so much, but I'm afraid because I love my daughter so much. And I'm just afraid that your book is going to break my heart in some way. And I would say, you don't need to be afraid. I think I did come out with a solution, but I can tell you, in the process of writing this book, at some point, every single character was like in jail, in bed with each other, or dead. Like, everybody got killed off at some point. The kid went to her, she went to her, went to somebody else. Like, it was like I was just juggling all of the storylines to try to figure out what was it that I actually wanted to say, and and how can I talk about this issue. I think as a novelist, we are always trying to raise questions. We are not maybe so good at answering them, but we all understand that the ending of the book gives a certain type of answer, unless you want to write the sort of ending that has, mobs of people running after you and trying to, kill you on the street. So given that I didn't want to have an open, unresolved ending to the book, I did want to resolve it. It took a lot of deep thinking and much research and interviews to find what I think was a solution to this specific situation in my novel. And I would say to people, it's like, I understand it's an impossible situation, but it is a book about unity and about the things that we have in common and about love, instead of the things that divide us, even though every character is deeply flawed and makes big mistakes.
Okay.
And Jonathan,
Sure. Yeah, I'll actually kind of take Dinah's form and say, I didn't think, I had no idea there was a love story to be located in my giant tapestry or panoramic view of Brooklyn. And then one emerged, and it was a very unlikely one, and it was a very uncharacteristically sweet one. Two people who find each other and are happy. and persist. And it was a kind of beam of light that just moved through some of the complexities and murk and direness of my story. And I was so sustained by it. And I realized it was becoming a favorite of some of my early readers too. And it was just a great piece of luck. It was like a lifeline.
Thank you. Okay. Rachelle, we have a question for you about resources you used for genealogical or familial research. My bad. They were just inquiring about that, but I also, wanted to add, like, you have this background in journalism. What was that like, interviewing your mother? So kind of two parts of the question.
Yeah, so I really interviewed her just as a distraction when she was ill. I didn't really think I was going to use that material. She had given around 16 hours of Holocaust testimony over 3 different interviews. So I had a lot of material with that. And then when I did my own interview, that was an additional amount of hours where I asked her a bit about that and the rest of her life. But I started writing this book. We had the longest lockdown in the world in Melbourne, Australia. And I started writing in lockdown number 6. And so all I had was my computer and the internet. And I started reaching out to museums and institutions around the world, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, Yad Vashem in Israel. We have one in Australia and in Melbourne and in Sydney. We have several. And connecting with historians and academics. But I mean, it's just led me down this crazy trail where I've been looking for descendants of people who grew up with my mother. So I'm finding those people. I'm finding, I deal every day. I get an email from someone in Slovakia, someone in Poland, someone in America. And it was really incredible how much research was out there that I didn't know existed. So even you think of a lot of the Holocaust records were obviously destroyed as evidence, but some existed. And one of the things I found was when my mother arrived at Auschwitz, she was actually part of a selection where Dr. Joseph Mengele, very infamous, chose her to live rather than die. And she didn't know she was part of a selection. She didn't know that she met him and she encountered him. But I found that out so many decades later.
Yeah, it's really like mind-blowing the rabbit holes you can go down with research, and thank you for sharing that. Next question. Go ahead, Lady.
We have a good question that just came in. It says, for everybody, is it difficult to move on after you finish writing a deeply affecting book, or do you need to take time? What is that process? Let's start with Dinah.
Me? I don't find it difficult. I don't find it difficult at all. I'm just so glad it's over. And then I can something new and something fresh, and because actually, whilst I enjoy the editing, by the time you've done a structural, a line, a copy edit, a proofread, it's like, please go and let's start the next one. So I'm always excited by the next one. Otherwise I wouldn't still be writing. Actually, I would, I don't know, learn Italian. It's not hard for me to move on. I love it.
Yeah, I do think that, as a reader, you probably don't realize how many drafts we do of every book that gets published. I think before any professional sees it, meaning our agent or our editor, we have gone through at least, we've written and rewritten that book at least 3 times, and often more. And certain chapters, like the first chapter, go through like 10 different drafts. I mean, you're just doing that. You've already worked so hard on the book so many times before a professional sees it, and then they go to town. They're like, wow, I don't know about this relationship, and that doesn't work at all, and you drop that storyline, and thematically, are we sure that you're doing what you want to do? So you go through with your editor, I think, at least another at least another 3 drafts, usually. And then sometimes more. And then, you've got the copy editors. And if you have a sensitivity read and, all of these other people who are chiming in. And I had multiple copy editors who are chiming in with, does that factually make sense? And you lost a day there. That's actually not the weekend. That was a work day. So you can't have them having coffee because she works on that day. So we've gone through it so many times. I think, I wouldn't say that I'm sick of the book at the end. I always love my book, but it's a really long process before it's actually done. And but I do miss my characters. I have to say, I do miss them. And I kind of wish I could continue writing about them, because to dream up a whole new situation and a whole new world, it takes me a really long time. And it's hard to do.
For me, a book like this one is emotionally depleting as well as fulfilling, and I have to do other kinds of work for a while, and I mean, which is something I love. So it's a kind of moving on that's, I just agreed to write an essay, and I'm going to write a liner note for a DVD, and I've got a short story in mind for the summer. But I have to sort of recognize that this journey was a very enormous one for me, and it wouldn't make any sense for me to be expecting myself to open up such a large vehicle again. And instead, it's really nice for me to do some things that are more controllable and local, as a way of continuing to write, but not requiring of myself that I be in the crux of my own biggest themes and dilemmas and feelings.
Yeah, can understand that. Rachelle, did you answer? I don't think we.
No, I think for me, this book feels like the start of wanting to educate and understand all the things my mother went through even more thoroughly. So I don't know that I can really put it behind me. I'm not sure I'll ever stop the dreams I've been dreaming and have those thoughts about her too. But one of the things I think the outcome is, I try and tell everyone I meet, if they've got parents living, and even if they don't, to record their family histories and to ask the questions while people are still alive. If they're not alive, to then put down their own recollections on paper, because you listen to someone's eulogy and they'll go through, they lived here, they did this, they worked at that. But what's really important is a sense of who that person was, I think, and what they left behind in their values and their life lessons. So for me, this just feels like the start of a different conversation.
We actually talked about that for a bit on our last Writers to Watch, the idea of, memory and collecting memory as we go. So thank you for bringing that up.
This hour flew by, and we have just a few minutes left. First of all, Lainey, Grace, and I want to thank all 4 of you for sharing your stories with us. They're just absolutely brilliant and powerful, and you're all peeling away in one way or another some shells, and exposing with these stories, because they're all coming from somewhere. And so we thank you for doing that. With a few minutes left, we had talked about how the flame has been turned up so high when you think it can't get any higher, sadly, on banned books, and this ridiculous, I'm saying ridiculous because it is, situation with just this, freedom to read is something that everybody should have. So we thought, with a few minutes left, if we could go around, and any thoughts that you have on this topic, or if there's a book that you read as a child or as an adult, any book that is banned or challenged that that you love. It's open, it's general, but it's just sort of like whatever your thoughts are. So if we want to just go around with the few minutes we have left, that would be lovely.
Can I just say, I don't think there are any banned in the UK. I might be wrong, but as far as I know. So I haven't followed this story, but I can just say, when I was a young teenager in the early 1960s, Lady Chatterley's lover, D.H. Lawrence, was banned, and we all read it. There was one dog-eared copy that went round the school, and I read it underneath my blankets with a torch at night so my parents didn't know. So that,
Good for you.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's great.
Well, I have personal experience with banned books because my debut novel, Girl in Translation, has been taught in schools around the world for more than a decade and is now banned or challenged in different parts of the US. I also was not aware of this issue until a parent told me, I would like to defend your book and in front of the school board, and would you like to write a statement? So I was writing the statement, and then I just kind of got more and more fired up as I was writing it, and I decided to fly down and defend it in person. So I have been involved in this controversy, and as in the process, you know, I have librarian friends. I mean, I have the deepest love for librarians. And I have librarian friends and teachers all across the US who told me about the situations that they were facing. And I was just shocked that people are under siege, absolutely under siege, even in situations where they still have the power to make decisions about what books remain and don't. There is this incredible rhetoric of, you know, that they are grooming, that they are woke, that they are doing all of these things, and books are being targeted like mine, which is about, you know, very much based on my own life, has almost no sex in it whatsoever, as being pornographic, as an excuse to take this book about an Asian immigrant girl, a smart Asian immigrant girl, off the shelves because it is taught in a lot of schools. So I think this is an incredibly important topic and very, very dangerous movement.
I put the link to your talk, Jean, because it was fantastic in the chat. So everybody can go watch that later.
Thank you.
I was looking at the list of banned books just before this, some of the extraordinarily wonderful, important, you know, marvelous, you know, literature I've loved, literature I grew up with, and recent novels and books for children. And it's just extraordinary how short-sighted it is. But the one that leapt out at me, and I thought it somehow was so absolutely and such a self-own by the banners, is Captain Underpants, which is a story about basically kids who give their principal, this uptight, angry, bullying principal, a comic book, and it so hypnotizes him and transforms him that he starts behaving in this bizarre way. And it's almost like a confession, you know, some sort of weird confession that, you know, the people banning books are the principal, and they're afraid that the influence of this jubilant, hilarious, silly comic book or kids book will, you know, will overturn their little realities. It's just so sad and pathetic. You know, I take it very seriously, and of course, Jean, I can't imagine how enraged I would feel and what kind of campaign I would have to embark on if it happened to me. But I also find it so absolutely ludicrous and silly, and I think it deserves that kind of, you know, mockery as well. It's really symptomatic, you know.
Sad.
Yeah.
I bought a book as show and tell because Mouse by Art Spiegelman was banned, I know, in the States in some schools. And to me, that was a book that opened up a discussion of the Holocaust and made it accessible, particularly to younger people. Everything is about context. I mean, one of the arguments, I think, was that younger people shouldn't be exposed to some of the horrors. And it's true that you want it to be age appropriate, you want to explain what's going on, but banning is not the answer, because so many people wouldn't have access to the information they obviously need through books.
That's exactly right. And while everybody who is watching right now, obviously, you know, we're all on the same page, yeah, literally, figuratively, but we appreciate your thoughts on the subject, and the books that you've all mentioned are, you know, they run the range, and I think that librarians, I know that they are at the forefront of this, and they will keep fighting that fight, and the freedom to read. So thank you for that. And thank you for this hour. This was wonderful. This was just such a great conversation. So many comments in the chat room, just people saying, wow, how great this is. And there's just this real, you know, wonderful conversation going on here. A lot of connective tissue that you don't realize until you start to drill down a little bit as to why the books were written, and then there you are. So I think if we could show the graphic one more time of the books, our opening graphic, just to remind folks what the books that we're talking about, and the jackets. And we have Dinah Jefferies, Night Train to Marrakech, goes on sale November 28th. Jean Kwok, The Leftover Woman, goes on sale October 10th. Rachelle Unreich, on A Brilliant Life, goes on sale October 24th. And Jonathan Lethem, Brooklyn crime novel, on sale October 3rd. And there they all are. And here you all are. And we thank you for your words written and spoken tonight. And we wish you all the very best from the bottom of our hearts. Lainey, Grace, is there anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye? Or authors, if there's anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
Just thanks so much. It's really a joy to be with you.
Thank you, guys. We love you.
We love you too.
My heart. I wrote so many things down. Everybody's speaking, just so many words of wisdom. And this is a lovely night. So thank you.
One of the few hours of my work week that I wish was longer. So thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you. And so good being in the room with all these incredible authors.
Yeah, we feel the same way. So congratulations on all of your these publications that will be out soon, before we know it. Not that I want to wish the summer away, but we wish you all well, and thank you again